Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dychronic, host on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 PvP primaries in Destiny 2. And as always, this is completely subjective, based on my opinion, the way I like to use these weapons, as well as the opinion of my buddies who help create the spreadsheet, as well as get the gameplay in the background. So a big thank you to them. They sent me a lot of time to create higher quality content. Link to their Twitches in the description down below. As a TLDR, when it comes to the spreadsheets and the current meta, a lot of things actually have changed. The 120s completely kicked out of the top 10 from number 1. Shotguns being nerfed again for their slide spread angle, making it so certain range zones are taken over by different weapons, including the 120 section. And just in general, we're kind of in the most balanced meta that we ever have been. There are still problems with Shatter Diving Hunters or Celestial Fire Melee, etc., but we are in the most balanced meta we have been in a very long time. So you should keep in mind, even the top 10 weapons that I chose for this video are not the end-all be-all. You can still use a lot of the non-ranked items and still do fine. And of course, these spreadsheets and these videos really would not be possible without support of my patrons on Patreon. Truly, these spreadsheets take 10 to 20 hours every single week, and if I did not get the support from Patreon, I'd have to get a part-time job, and I wouldn't have time to make the spreadsheets. So truly, your support on Patreon really brings these sheets forward. Link in the description down below if you want to check out some of the rewards. Moving on, let's go ahead and take a look at the spreadsheet. As you can see on screen right now, this is my spreadsheet. All of its dark theme, pictures, links, exotic quest information, catalyst information, recommendations for legendary perks, as well as the top 10 honorable mentions across all the different types of weapons that I consider for this video. And obviously, I don't really do my top 10s like a lot of other people. You can see what my top 10 are, but the reasons why certain things are ranked the way they are, and the reasons where you'd use certain things is going to be very important. I would say that you probably wouldn't use Ace of Spades in every single circumstance. There's going to be different circumstances. You're going to want other things. In this video, we're going to talk about those reasons why, as well as talk about each class of weapons. If you really like autos, let's talk about the best of the best. All right, so first up, let's talk about the auto rifles. Now, obviously, the auto rifles are not ranked in the top 10, but when it comes down to it, I find the auto rifle is going to be one of the easier weapon types to use. So if you are new to the game, or you find yourself in the lower section of the Crucible, the auto rifles might end up being your best choice. Specifically, I really like the Adaptive Frame 600s, the best combination of range, control, stability, handling, mag size, perks, availability across the board. Furthermore, if you are just looking for great stuff to use when you're just getting the Crucible, I would also recommend the 390 pulse rifles, again, not ranked in the top 10, and the 3-burst 491 adaptive frame sidearms. This should be a good coverage of the different range potentials while using a very consistent set of weapons. Back over to the auto rifles, when it comes to my particular choice, the slower fire rates, even though they do have more range, have a lot more flinch, have a lot more recoil, and less stability, where the 600s end up being more effective at range. And the 720s, although they have a very large magazine, I'd rather use a sidearm or a submachine gun. And finally, the exotic options. Monte Carlo works incredibly well with melee-based builds like Celestial Fire or any of the Freezy melees, and Suros and Hardlight, exotic tier stats, and just incredible perks overall. And finally, we finally got a kinetic 600 RPM adaptive frame auto rifle that's actually good. Scathlock, Last Breath, excellent, and I would highly recommend them, and they're not that hard to get either. Following that, let's talk about the bows. Now, generally, I'm not a big fan of bows because they're very high risk, high reward, and having infinite range is not really that great, and usually you're going to be pairing them with another primary in a wombo combo. Shoot a bow shot, switch to your hand cannon. That does limit you to not be able to use a special, or it limits you to having a bow plus a shotgun, which leaves that middle zone very vulnerable. However, in certain game modes, especially very heavy team-based game modes, competitive and trials, bows have actually seen a lot of use and are also very effective. You shoot somebody with a bow like Le Monarch in the head, you do 3/4 of their damage, and then some teammate shoots them once with a hand cannon or auto rifle and they die. On top of that, it also gives them dot, making it so they can't recover over time. You can also see those numbers so you know exactly where they are behind cover, and it hits multiple enemies, allowing you for more information on where the enemies are. So when it comes down to it, the best bow, probably going to be Le Monarch. Up next, let's talk about these sidearms. Now, there hasn't been a huge splash when it comes to sidearms. I still don't think they're going to be in the top 10 for the Crucible, but they have had 4 new sidearms drop this season, and a pretty saucy one in the form of Peace Bomb that can get Iron Reach, allowing you to max out your range with it, allowing for, on top of having Rangefinder, which is a pretty saucy submachine or a sidearm. And if you don't know, these 3 bursts are definitely going to be the best sidearm choice, the number of kills per clip before being forced into a reload, and the general stability and range that these offer on top of their time to kill is just insane. If you don't know, 2 bursts to kill an enemy with this weapon is really high time to kill, or at least is really good time to kill. And when it comes to the exotic options, I actually really do like Traveler's Chosen. It works really well, again, in a lot of ability-based builds. Every kill with this weapon can give you 30% of your grenade, your melee, and your class ability back just by getting one kill and hitting that reload button. So you command when you get your abilities back, which again works really well with those Celestial Fire, work really well with those Shadow Diving Hunters or anything else that needs abilities. And it also got a catalyst this season, giving it full auto and osmosis. If you don't know, full auto almost always gives you 10% more fire rate. And I'm not talking about just the effectiveness of it, I'm talking about the fact that it literally does. If you don't know, full auto increases the fire rate across the board. Up next, let's talk about these submachine guns. Now, the submachine guns haven't had too many changes. Literally, there were actually 0 new submachine guns this season. However, I have changed my mind when it comes to the best of the best, where I still believe that the aggressive frames are going to be an excellent choice. Great combination of range, stability, handling, opportunity, etc., etc. The Shayo's Wrath and Multi-Mac, the energy and kinetic different submachine guns, although very different from each other, are going to be the best in the meta. Shayo's Wrath having a very high range, lots of range options. I think you can max out the range when it comes to different options. And it also has a new perk in the form of Harmony, which a lot of people are definitely loving. And of course the Multi-Mac, great stats all around, a little bit closer range, but 100 recoil direction, great perk options, and the super nerds tell me that if you can get your submachine gun to a 17 zoom level, apparently that's the Goldilocks zone. And if you have the Model 8 red sight on it and a lot of range buffs to it, including Iron Reach, you can get to that perfect optimal 17 zoom. Now, I'm not really that familiar as to why, but they say it's the perfect combination of stickiness to range without removing too much of your vision. When it comes to the other submachine guns, Wrist Runner is used as an anti-arc. If you're seeing an enemy with a stag and arc buddies, it can be used to good effect. And the Teraba, while amazing when you get the perk, when you die, you lose all of it. So it is a bit of a wishy-washy. And the rest of it is up to you. Up next, we have these scout rifles. Now, I'll say in general, scout rifles are not really a big part of the meta. For the most part, pulse rifles are gonna be the maximum range you're gonna need in PvP as well. Considering how many opportunities there are to move up from a different angle, how much cover there is in the game, we don't need this much range. Deadman's Tale is a very unique version that's more like the hand cannons of the 120 hand cannons, but with a lot more range and that hip fire capability that's similar to Last Word. Beyond that, there's a lot of new rapid fires that are doing pretty well this season. Contingency Plan and Servant Leader. A lot of people like the rapid fires, but I personally prefer having pulse rifles or auto rifles in those zones. And generally, most people know Deadman's Tale is just an amazing option. It's just great that you can get a 2-shot kill with 1 major damage buff, like the Empowering Rift, I believe. And the faster fire rate thing with the Catalyst is just so good. Finally, when it comes to the other options, the 200 RPMs are a great place to start if you don't really know much about scout rifles, and Mida Multi-Tool is an excellent option, great stats, and just now really great now that it's no distractions instead of outlaws, it's special catalyst. Following that, let's talk about the pulse rifles. Now, the pulse rifles have actually seen a big boom this season, considering the fact that 120 hand cannons have fallen off. The pulse rifles have started to take over that zone. No Time to Explain was really great last season. It is still really great this season with very high exotic tier stats, great sights, great perk, a damage perk, allows you to see where enemies come from because it shoots for you, etc., etc. 2 burst kills, you know how it works. Beyond that, the legendary versions, the 340s, like the Messenger and all the other 340s in Energy and Kinetic are all doing incredibly well. And again, very consistent. If you can get 1 major damage buff like High Energy Fire, Kill Clip, Multi-Kill Clip, and even a couple stacks of Rampage, getting those 2 burst kills is just so very easy as long as you can get that stability and flinch under control. And also the other side of the spectrum, the Rapid Fires, although I personally am not the biggest fan of them, if you're using mouse and keyboard, you can definitely get them under control. And the Darkest Before and Grid Skipper are definitely power creep versions of the other 540 pulse rifles. If you don't know what I mean by this, the newer weapons that drop in the newer seasons in Destiny 2 are oftentimes slightly better than their counterparts. Darkest Before has like 5 to 10 more range than Time War Inspired, making it a much better option for stickiness and control. And this is happening throughout the game. Palindrome and Fatebringer are just stat whore versions of any of the other 140s, which is a big reason why I was kind of in support of sunsetting, because Bungie's only alternative is to give us weapons that are the same or worse, or give us weapons that are better, which kind of is a semi-sunset. So if your old weapons are not as good, then they just kind of fade into the background. And finally, again, if you're a newer player, the 390 pulse rifles are probably still going to be your best starting point. Great combination of control, handling, range, etc., and options. Up next at number 2, we have the Vex Mitha class, which is actually very close to being at number 1, if it weren't for the fact that it comes from a raid drop, which is somewhat difficult or inconsistent to get, and it's kind of insane how powerful this thing is. It got so many different buffs this season: increased damage in PvE, more stability, more range than any of the other 360 auto rifles. It has a pretty large magazine, it gets more stability and a rampage-like effect whenever you get a kill with the catalyst. The linear fusion rifle thing can be stowed, so you don't lose all the stacks when you stow the weapon. It's just such an effective weapon. It's so powerful, and the 360 auto rifles already had a good time to kill, and this does the same damage as it, but slightly faster fire rate, on top of, again, better stability, better everything overall. This weapon is really, really, really good. The only thing holding it back, again, is the fact that it drops as a raid drop. And it is technically a free-to-play raid, Vault of Glass, so a lot of people have the availability to get it, and as we go through the seasons, it might end up higher on the list if it never gets nerfed, which it probably will get nerfed. After that, Fighting Lion, I kind of skipped around on it, but it's a primary. I'd rather use a special. It does more damage. Infinite ammo is cool, but wasn't really that much of an issue before. And finally, for the best weapon type in the game, still the same as always, we have the hand cannons. However, the 120s, completely kicked from the top 10, are not terrible by any means. They're just not nearly as good as they were before, and other things have taken over their range. When it comes down to the legendary versions, the 140s are going to be the best of the best. The 120s have too tight of a zone as far as their range fall off and their range effectiveness. The 180s fire a little too fast, cover your target a little bit too much, and I'd rather use an auto rifle or pulse rifle or some of the other options over the 180s. Although Vulpecula is kind of fun with its new perks. The 140s just fit in a really nice zone of stability, of range, of perk options, and as you can tell, there are a lot of 140 hand cannons, so you have a lot of options no matter what. And then finally, yes, Fatebringer and Palindrome, like I mentioned before, are power creep versions. They have better stats. On top of having Adept and Time Lost version, they have better stats than any other 140 in the game outside of the exotics. So if you can get a good roll, which Fatebringer, by the way, has explosive payload as one of the options here, you're going to be able to get, like, one of the best weapons in the game, which is why you're probably seeing a lot of Fatebringer. It's a free-to-play raid, Vault of Glass. You can get it a lot of different chances throughout the raid. I think there's, like, 7 drop opportunities. And again, you can get explosive payload. When it comes to the exotic options, Thorn, Lumina, and Hawkmoon, I kind of consider more of like a stat whore version of a 140. It's easier to get these as the really good versions because they just come out of the box with really great stats, 100 recoil direction, having a damage option in Lumina and Thorn, and then Hawkmoon, somewhat unique with Paracausal, allowing for those 2-shot kills, and the 1-shot kill, just slightly less range than I'd want to, and it kind of backs it up into the number 4 position. But still, amazing weapons. At 4A, we have Hawkmoon, Dire Promise, Fatebringer, and Palindrome, all excellent options. You're going to see them all over the place. And finally, at number 1, we have the Ace of Spades, which truly is set apart from the other 140 hand cannons, has some of the highest range of any 140 in the game, nearly the 120s range, to be honest with you. It has the damage perk, which is a better version of Kill Clip, the Momentum Mori. You can see your radar aiming down sights. There's a Dragonfly explosion, which is not amazing, but, you know, it helps. And then there's the Outlaw effect on top of a really large magazine, which is very important to hand cannons, and overall, really great stats. The only thing it's really missing for stats is going to be the handling. So put dexterity and targeting, and that should be solved. When it comes down to the hand cannons, I would say the best entry point for people who are not familiar with hand cannons is going to be the Ace of Spades. It's one of the easiest weapons to use, again, for those really nice stats, really great perks overall, and it's very available from the archive right now, and it's been out from Forsaken for like 2 to 3 years now, so a lot of people have this. And finally, at number 7, we do have the Last Word, especially on console. This thing rips people apart. The time to kill when blind firing is absolutely insane. It's much better than most other things, although very limited in range and somewhat difficult to use. And finally, a little honorable mention, just the Sunshot. It's a fun weapon to use, just barely missing the top 10. And of course, as always, these spreadsheets can be found over at my Discord server, a link in the description down below, on the channel #SpreadsheetStocks. And if you don't see that channel, you need to verify with a bot. This is to prevent a lot more scammers. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Truly, again, without their help, I would not be able to make these spreadsheets as much as I do. Specifically, a big thank you to Mom and Dak, Dr. Strange, Kelly Allen, Jill Smith, Monday, Stu Bachman, Raymond Shoner, Panther, Casey Reagan for their support on Patreon, as well as everybody else on all of the different tiers of Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Dychronic, and I'll see you guys on the next one.